Let's look at a little further on the same concept of erasing. Let's see 3b above once and consider one further problem. The political parts of the book were intended to reveal many things. So we have bracketed this sentence. NP is the political part of the books and VP were intended, and we have embedded sentence to reveal many things. We know that the function of NP, the political part of the books, is that of the subject of the higher clause. Now, what is the function of the embedded non-finite subject? To reveal many things, because we have a slot shown in the case of 3 dots here. It is obviously not the subject of were intended, though it is related to the subject by the gap. So actually the non-finite clause appears in the position of a verb complement. That's verb complement, that some subject is missing, but it works as a complement, which is parallel to an object clause, which is object clause, but it has a verb complement lacking its subject. So if we look at this, the sentence, bracket sentence, VP intended, and then we have embedded sentence S bar, the political parts of the book to reveal many things. So we have a place here before to reveal many things, which should be the political parts of the book to reveal many things. So this is what we deal with the concept of raising. It must be justified to treat the clause as retained object clause. Retained object clause means that when a clause is left on its place and the other constituent is moved to the left in the sentence, the left clause is known as retained clause. The non-finite clause is a remnant of the original object clause. It tells us the non-finite clause tells us that it is the retained clause. It has been left out. Passivization in this case does not affect the whole object clause, but only the subject of the object clause, because it is moved to the higher rank clause, leaving the rest of the clause in its original position, which is known as retained object, following the verb in the higher clause. So it follows the verb in the higher, like believe, prefer, etc. The passive of verbs such as intend, think, expect, say, etc. all trigger raising of NP from an embedded non-finite subject, as can be seen. For example, if we look at these, they are thought to be acts of the imagination. So they act, right? So the they is raised to the subject. John is expected to be back. So it is John who is to come back. It is raised to the initial position, right? So they are said to be leaving. So they are to leave. So they are raised from their position, embedded clause to the initial position. So you can find the same thing in all these rest of the clauses, that the subject of the embedded clause is raised to the subject position of the main clause. So it's very important to observe that the gap left over after movement cannot be filled by another lexical element. For example, the political parts of the book were intended. We know that the political parts of the book is the subject of the embedded clause, and intended to reveal. So we have the place here which is shown through the 3 dots. So if we fill this place like this, the political parts of the book were intended various chapter. So it will be an incorrect sentence, and you can have the same. We have already discussed in previous topics. So in 13a, subject position of the main clause is occupied by the NP, a conspiracy. As in the example discussed above, this subject NP has been raised out of the embedded clause, leaving a gap. So a conspiracy was believed. It's a passive, the embedded sentence, to exist in the country. So actually a conspiracy to exist in the country. So this was the embedded clause. The conspiracy was removed from the from the subordinate clause to the main clause. So the grammatical function of subject in the main clause is realized by there. We can have example of, we shall assume again that there originates in the lower clause as the subject of exist and has been moved into the main clause at the subject position. So sometimes we use there, but even in those cases we must assume that there was actually in the subject position of the embedded clause and it was moved to the initial position. It was raised in rank to the subject of the higher clause. For example, there was believed. So there has been moved from the sentence from the place before to exist. Right? There binds the gap in the subordinate clause. So we have seen before that there can only function as an existential subject in the sentences. So in 14b we see that such a subject of non-finite existential sentence may also be raised. So there being an existential subject in a subordinate clause can also be raised to the higher rank clause in the position of the subject. So far we have concentrated on raising from non-finite clauses with infinitive. So the process also applies, however, to clauses with participle in ing, in ed, and to verbless clauses. So it means that this concept of raising still goes further. So it's not only the in a non-finite clauses, but also the clauses in which we have ing form, present participle, past participle, ed, or even the verbless clauses. We pick up some component from there, which may be the subject, and take it to the higher rank clause.